Hello and welcome to the Key to Playing Gorgon. A warning, the wiki page is very wrong on many of Gorgon's abilities. All numbers discussed have been tested on my end, although some of the testing is impossible to complete. Gorgon is a terrifying cross between a human and a spider. She has low burst damage but reliable damage over time, and has high crowd control. She is extremely mobile, both inside and out of the domes. Gorgon's mobility comes from her traversals, web sling. Nicknamed Spider-Man for a good reason, Gorgon soars across the sky. She is extremely lightweight in the air, and even if she's harpooned, a quick break on the harpoon can continue her forward movement. Gorgon can also cling to walls with her traversals. To identify a wall that can be clung to, hold the climb hotkey and aim at a wall. If the web icon shows around your crosshair, you can hang on to it. To cling to a wall, aim at a viable location and hold down the traversal key until you stick to it. Once up there, you can begin a wall pounce. Similar to the sneak pounce, you drop from the sky and pin a hunter to the ground. It deals additional bonus damage compared to sneak pounce, and disables them. Using them in combat can be viable because the sudden movement from floor to wall to floor can mess up hunters' aims, while also disabling them for that time in order to get more damage with your follow-up abilities. Gorgon's first real ability is her web snare. The web snare fires a circular projectile which travels until it hits a surface. It can hit multiple hunters and wildlife. The web applies a 4-second damage over time debuff while also slowing the hunters and reducing their jetpack effectiveness. It ticks once per second, dealing 100 damage each second for 400 damage total. Upgrading web snare to tier 2 increases the size of the projectile and reduces the cooldown. Tier 3 increases the damage by 10% for a total of 40 additional damage, and increases the speed at which the projectile moves. When engaging, this is often the best ability to fire first. The mobility debuffs make it extremely difficult for the hunters to dodge your follow-up attacks. The second ability, Spider Trap, fires a small spider which burrows into the ground. Firing subsequent spiders will kill the previous one the moment the new spider hits the ground. You can also see the spider's location on the map. Spider traps wait in ambush for hunters to come nearby. When triggered, it charges the hunter, screaming loudly. Once it touches the hunter, it snatches them, disables them, and deals initial damage. It will then run away with the hunter for 4 seconds, dealing additional damage over time. Unfortunately, the trap doesn't create damage numbers, so it's very difficult to identify how powerful it is. However, through extensive testing we have found it to do about 598 total damage for the first tier, and on third tier, which increases the damage, it does about 659. Based on our estimates, it does about half of that initially and the rest over time. It's very important to note that the spider trap can be shot and killed. This prevents it from dealing any damage, but is a good distraction. When retreating, I often throw a spider trap behind me to delay the hunters for that 1 extra second. When in combat, I fire the spider behind corners, on cliffs, and behind the hunters. This allows it to ambush the hunters and forces them to turn their focus away from me. Tier 2 increases the health pool of the spider, making it harder to kill, and reduces the cooldown. 3 again increases the health pool, and gives it a 10% increase to damage. Acid Spit, Gorgon's third ability, fires a spray of acid. The stream of acid dishes out initial damage while also leaving pools once it hits the ground. Standing in the pools deals more damage. Web Snare combos beautifully with Acid Spit because it makes it very difficult to leave the pools, ensuring maximum damage. Acid Spit is also amazing for clearing deployables. A fraction of a second aiming the spray at Sunny's drone leaves a pool that will clear it in a second. This means flicking your camera to priority targets is well worth the practice. It can clear turrets, mines, traps, and more. It is also very good for clearing wildlife. The final ability Gorgon has is the Mimic. Mimic is the only ability that cannot be used in the air. All other abilities can be used while traversing. Mimic creates a copy of Gorgon, made of what appears to be webbing. When activated, you become in control of the Mimic and leave the true Gorgon behind. Mimic can use all movement and basic attacks. Meanwhile, the Gorgon is frozen in place. The Mimic has low health and ticks down slowly. Damage to either the Mimic or the Gorgon will eventually break the Mimic and disable it. After roughly a second, the Mimic becomes armed. Pressing the ability key or having it killed will detonate the Mimic, causing large knockback, damage, and apply a poison. The direct damage for Mimic is 332 damage, and it ticks for 70 damage for the next 6 seconds for a total of 752 damage. Upgrading the Mimic to tier 2 increases the health pool, giving it more time to arm, and reduces the cooldown. Upgrading it again increases the range of the detonation as well as the damage. For Gorgon, I have 2 potential starts. I either go double web, 1 acid, 1 spider, or I go double acid, 1 web, and 1 spider. Acid and web are very good for clearing wildlife and fighting when needed. Spider is very useful for anti-chase. On stage 2, I have 2 builds which I've put extensive time into, but only one that I really think is viable. The one I was trying most recently is maxing out Mimic stage 2. While this can work, most of the time good teams are positioned well enough that the blast hits at most 1 while leaving you at risk. In low level games, it definitely has worked, and I've had success against Lazarus because they can't heal the overall damage over time. But against high skill teams, it's definitely not worth it. The current build that I like is maxing out Web and Acid for stage 2. The cooldown reduction, increased damage, and increased area of effect is very valuable for hitting multiple targets and dealing massive damage. It's really good for fighting in enclosed spaces because it makes it very difficult to dodge the web as well as making the acid cover more terrain that they could be walking on. One important thing to note is I dislike hitting stage 3. This is because I can often bait fights where my low health and hit and run playstyle allows me to take advantage of their spread out chase. This is a problem when I go to stage 3 because they usually will set up and prepare for a fight, so I can't take advantage of their poor positioning as easily. Now, if I do hit stage 3, I will usually finish out whichever ability I'm using a lot. If I'm going with the Mimic build, that means I'll usually get Web and Acid both to 2, and then decide which one I like to be on 3 more. Usually I end up going with Acid, but it again depends on the game. If I'm going with the maxing Web and Acid for stage 2 build, it again depends on the game. Sometimes I'll max Spider because it makes it harder for them to kill it, and gives me more space in using it as a distraction. Other times I'll get 2 points in Mimic, because I can use it to engage from long range and blow through a shield, cooldown easily without taking punishment. Then I can engage afterwards, using my real abilities to fight. For perks, I usually build with Hunger, Feral Instincts, and Evolved Claw. Hunger gives me 40% feeding speed and 7% move speed, which can never be discounted. This allows me to get that much closer to stage 2 before the hunters drop, and stage 2 is where I do 80% of my fighting. Feral Instincts, the silver perk, gives me climb speed, feeding speed, and smell range. The mobility of eating, of course, as well as hitting that power peak for stage 2, and the smell range lets me find isolated hunters as well as juking when needed. This gives me a little more space and lets me fight at stage 2 better because of that additional knowledge. Evolved Claw gives 40 damage per second for 3 seconds on a melee attack. This is basically another melee attack and a half, and with the pattern that I go with in combat, it's usually traversal into melee into ability, repeating as often as possible. Using Evolved Claw literally doubles my melee damage based on my timings, and so it's worth it to me. Cooldown reduction is another I've been playing with, but I have had slightly more enjoyment with Evolved Claw. Cooldown reduction of course allows me to cover the walls with acid more, drop more spiderlings, and slow them down with web a bit more. One thing to note though, is with Evolved Claw, if you melee with the Mimic, it applies the poison anyways, and then you can detonate it, getting 80 damage with the Mimic, 120 damage with the poison, and then the 700 damage with the detonation. So it's very useful if you can land that. So that previous video was just something I ran, no big deal. However, this one is one I actually want to cover. This game I was playing in a 4-stack with everyone except the Trapper in this match. And I'd played against them a few times. I actually lost stage 1 in the first fight, the game right before this. I had a game where it came down to like 1 person alive, 1 bar of health, and I ended up losing. I think I'm 1-3 against them. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. So anyways, in this one I'm running the web, double web, single acid, single spiderling. And something really important to note is in this one, I play a lot of dodging. I avoid them as much as I can. I prevent domes. I actually hit stage 2 without being domed until... Actually, I can't remember. We'll look into it in a second. And then these perks, I'm running the same thing as I mentioned earlier. Poison over time, feeding speeds, climbing speed, move speed, and smell range mixed across my perks. And they have a very defensive team. They've got Kyra and they have Hank, and so I know that Hank is going to be a priority. But he's going to be very difficult to kill because this Hank player is godlike and extremely frustrating. So we'll start with the beginning. And I have a really bad start in this game. I mess up by missing my abilities on things. I miss my attacks to kills on wildlife. So I have a really slow start, which means I could have been domed a lot earlier and it could have been way worse. And again, when playing Monster, one of the most important things to know is your feeding rate. So on this map, I go for a quick double and then a quick triple meet. And then I go for a pair of doubles and another single double, and then I think another pair of doubles. And so I get that really quick and it gets me to him. I evolve so much faster. So here the hit didn't register. And then my ability hits a wall instead of the wildlife that I needed it to. But I still managed to recover. It's still possible to clear it. It's just a second or two slower than it would be. And these birds are annoying, but not a big deal. So if you note here, the web shot is actually way bigger than you'd assume, and using it to hit targets, even if they're fairly spread out, is very effective. And the cooldown, because I have it level 2, means I can use it way more often than normal. So I use that to clear multiple packs of wildlife. Like, these guys are super spread, but it hits them both. And it doesn't kill them instantly because it just applies the dot. And so you have to be... You can't be standing on them, you have to give yourself time to approach. And that way you're a bit more efficient with landing your abilities and getting the food off. And so here, this is why the smell range is so useful on Gorgon. Gorgon's traversals are some of the fastest in the game and give a lot of air distance, and so if you angle them right, you can go super far. And smell range, of course, lets me notice things easily, so I catch the assault right there. I'm almost ready to evolve, but I don't have time to finish those meats that I cleared. And I get spotted by the scan. But because the traversals, you can combo them in the air rather than having to wait to land, you can actually go really fast with burst movement, and so I dodge the channel of the dome, and I can get myself clear. And playing in lines like this with Gorgon, since you soar through the sky, is really, really useful. It lets you avoid, and there, if you notice, I landed my Spiderling, so that delayed them probably a good 5-6 seconds for the actual disable, and then the time they have to go catch back up because it pulled them away from me. Again, hunter awareness is important. I picked this spot because I can't be orbitaled, and there's a roof over my head, and that'll protect me. And I also pick it because there's a good line for me to triple traversal right out. Skill build is maxing this, and there's nothing wrong with landing a defensive Spiderling. So I know they're going to catch me no matter what. This is a choke point that they can cut me off on, so I'm focusing on getting armor. One thing Gorgon is fairly weak on is a lot of short elevation cliffs. Right now there's only 2 of those that they can really play around, and it's mostly flat, so this is actually a pretty good dome. And I'm prioritizing the support. Using him and getting damage onto multiple targets through the slows of the web and the acid allows me to be very punishing. In my Spiderling, I actually throw it behind them there, if you noticed, and it manages to trigger, and while they're focusing me through the orbital and through the shields, I get him pinned. One perk that might be valuable, however, is using traversal cooldown, because in the dome, you are very often out of traversals, which means you're unable to be moving around where you need to be. So there, that's when the damage over time from my poison attacks really paid off. That extra 40 damage managed to finish him and get me out with only losing, I think it ends up to be 2 bars of health. No, 1 bar of health, 1.5. Either way, it's good. And throwing all my abilities behind me makes it harder for them to chase, so I can get that little extra time. Gorgon definitely is strong for her high mobility, but she's also weak for her low health pool and low burst damage potential. And so being able to isolate hunters while you can't burst them down, you can still pick them off, using your mobility to get onto them fast. I make an attempt here using that. I note that it's only the medic and the support is weaker. But I miss my web shot onto the... I hit it on the tree. And even though I have 20 seconds left, I decide it's better to run, because their entire team is now here, and I won't be able to withstand all that assault, and I won't be able to kill off the support. So instead I go for a better location. As I mentioned, short cliffs are really bad because it makes you have to use your full abilities to hunt them down, and it lets the hunters use minimal fuel in order to climb. But high cliffs, if you get a web shot onto them when they're climbing, you can also acid the walls, which will dish out massive damage that they can't get out of. And so abusing the high cliffs can be very punishing. Now, of course, I'm using my smell range. I know I'm going to be seen, and I'm going to try and let them come to me. And then once they're in that cliff area, but they don't go for me, instead they go around, so I just double back. I'm trying to get them to fight in that area because that's my biggest advantage. As long as I can keep them off the anchor points to the weather tower. The anchor points of the weather tower will be bad for me, whereas the actual cliffs right next to them are very good for me. And as I mentioned, I've been playing with these guys for a while, so I'm trash talking them. Another thing to consider because of your high mobility is denying buffs. Like, I got the climb speed because that helps me fight slightly better on the tall cliffs, but being able to rotate between the buffs a lot quicker and knowing their spawn times is very useful. It's something that applies to all monsters. It's just something that I find easier to do on Gorgon. So now I'm actually not sure what they're doing. I still don't know, even after reviewing the video. But it seems like they're running away, so I decided to try and pick them off while they're using fuel to get away from me. I go for a wall pounce because he's isolated and the bonus damage, but he's smart, avoids it. And now we get to see the real punish of all these short cliffs. I have to waste time climbing them every single time he goes up and down them, which means I can't be attacking, I can't be fighting, and they can be punishing me because it doesn't impact their ability to fight if they're on the cliffs. And of course, these trees, these cliffs, if I hit a web shot onto the cliff instead of them, that mitigates so much of my damage and so much of my CC, which is really painful. I end up trading, I believe it's 4 or 3 bars in exchange for the support strike, which was not worth it. And they outplayed me hard here. Yeah, they really win this. Even though I'm managing to keep him against walls, even though I'm keeping acid on him, I'm keeping him webbed, I'm doing so much damage. It's just, I can't stay on him hard enough to prevent the healing and to get the damage I need. Yeah, this little second of me not being able to finish him. And there it is. 4 bars? No, 3 bars of health. So yeah, like the area I'm standing in right now, that's a good spot to fight. They climb the cliffs, I can acid the walls. They jump in the air, I can web shot them to make their fuel more, less efficient. They end up climbing on top, I can have a spiderling up top to catch them. But I need the health pool, which is why I take the evolve instead. And now I know it's time to go for buffs, as I mentioned earlier. Damage resistance is one I want. Because I sacrifice so much health just for that support strike, I am instead going for the the damage resistant buff, which I know spawns right here, and it gives more damage resistance, barely, than the damage increase buff that they get, which is what they go to claim prior to the fight. So that's what I choose. And now they have a lot of short cliffs here, but I'm trying to force the medic into a bad position. The standard right now is to use the bridge, which is right where the medic's going, but I actually managed to knock him away using my heavy attacks as well as the web shot, and I get him pinned in this low ground, which is very bad for him. He ends up just trying to jump between them, And I can use the spiderlings, dropping them around, in order to annoy them and make it slightly harder for them. Yeah, he's doing his best, but because I'm doing my absolute hardest to keep web shot onto him, it means he's got minimal fuel. And there's when they make the mistake. The spiderling that I had set down managed to land on the medic and ends his life. And now because of acid and web shot that I have long range on, I can interrupt revives and prevent them from ever getting him back. There, they don't clear the spiderling soon enough again, forcing them into a bad position. I can get the support. Spiderling grabs Trapper, and I can end it from here. So yeah, lots of short cliffs are really painful. Anything slightly taller is absolutely brutal to fight against.
Monster wins.
Good game.
Good game.